Aithra is an AI-LLM-powered threat and risk assessment tool for medical devices that complies with FDA-recognized standards. The input to Aithra is your existing medical device documentation and diagrams in the form of PDFs and images. Those can be directly uploaded to Aithra, at which point it will analyze and extract the information necessary to perform the threat and risk assessment, including parsing any embedded figures within the PDF file. The example we're using here is the ankle monitor predictor of strokes that comes from the MITRE MDIC Playbook for Threat Modeling Medical Devices. We'll very quickly look at an example of the level of detail utilized within this documentation that describes the system that Aithra will utilize for doing the remaining steps of the threat and risk assessment process. It's roughly a 3-page document describing the overall functionality, the main components, the connections between the components within the system. Once it's parsed the PDF, we can then click Generate Report, at which point Aithra will do a systematic analysis of the threat and risk assessment following a well-defined process that we'll describe. The first step is to summarize the information that has been extracted from the description, providing a high-level summary of what the system does, a system diagram identifying the main components within the system, as well as automatically creating a data flow. The first main step in the threat and risk assessment process is automatically extracting and generating a list of assets, including hardware, software, data, and any relevant users that may be applicable for the threat and risk assessment being performed. Once Aithra has identified the assets within the system, it will perform a threat analysis, identifying the various threat scenarios that could affect each of those assets. For the threat scenarios that are identified, Aithra will do 2 things. One, it will identify each of the assets that are relevant to that threat scenario. It will also perform a stride analysis, which will indicate whether the threat involves spoofing, tampering, repudiation, information disclosure, denial of service, or elevation of privilege. Aithra will then analyze those threat scenarios and assets to determine the damage scenarios that may result from those threats. For each identified damage scenario, it will not only describe the damage that can result, but also the consequence, particularly consequences that relate to privacy and safety for patients and users. Once the damage scenarios are identified, one of the key components of Aithra's threat and risk assessment is the impact analysis for those damage scenarios. The impact assessment will analyze the impact in terms of safety to the patient or user, the financial impact that may result from a damage scenario to the manufacturer, the operational impact on the device itself, and the privacy impacts for the users using those devices, as well as combine those into an overall impact score along with a justification for each of those categories describing the reasoning for the ratings that are provided. Once the impact analysis is done, Aithra will then analyze a combination of assets, threat scenarios, and damage scenarios to identify the potential attack paths that can result in those identified damage scenarios. The attack path analysis will analyze several different components. One is identifying the entry point to the system. The second is identifying the steps an attacker would have to take to execute the attack. And most importantly, it will perform an exploitability analysis to score and rate the exploitability of the attack, taking into account the elapsed time, which indicates how long developing the attack will take, the expertise required of the attacker, the knowledge of the system the attacker needs to know to execute that attack, the window of opportunity, which indicates how the attack would actually happen and what level of access to a device the attacker would need, along with the equipment required from the system. All of that's combined to create an exploitability score and ultimately an exploitability rating. The attack path analysis and damage scenario impacts really come together when doing the final risk assessment. That risk assessment will consider the combination of the impact rating, the attack exploitability to determine an overall risk value, and indicate a treatment recommendation as well as a description of the treatments that could be provided in order to reduce the risks that have been identified. This risk assessment helps prioritize risks and determine the necessary security controls you have to implement within your system. Once that analysis has been completed, there's a download option which will download an Excel spreadsheet that incorporates all of the information that Aithra has produced as part of the threat and risk assessment. The downloaded spreadsheet includes a definition of the assets that were identified within the system, the threat scenarios, along with the stride analysis and relevant assets, each of the damage scenarios, along with the impact rating, overall impact rating, and impact justification, and the risk analysis, which combines together the attack path exploitability rating to determine the overall risk score and risk treatment and recommendations.